And welcome into another episode of Tiger Territory, part of the Foul Territory Network, a Detroit Tigers podcast. I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, is Cody Stavenhagen. And joining us for the first time, the TV side of your Detroit Tigers summer soundtrack, Jason Benetti. Jason, what's up? How you doing?
Hey, how are we? How are we all doing?
Doing great. A lot of interest in the Tigers these days. Not as busy as you. Do you have time to breathe? That's actually where we should start. Do you have time to breathe? Because, your schedule is insane. I get tired just thinking about it.
Yeah, so lung capacity is good. We've checked. We're sure. I would say Ian Eagle, who does the Final Four for TNT and CBS and is a tremendous football announcer in the NFL and all that. He said to me when I asked him about his schedule when I was in college, he was like, well, I'm not digging ditches and I'm not using my hands and I don't have to wake up at specific times other than to catch flights and go to games. And I do feel like that about it. Like there are people who have way harder jobs than I do. I just kind of get to go around the country and do stuff. That said, when the football baseball overlap ended, I did have one night where I slept for I would say 11 hours. That was good.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, Jason. We know you're a busy man. In fact, when I was, thinking about reaching out to you, I was like, we'd love to have Benetti on the pod. I was like, I don't know when to text him or what he's doing or how busy he's going to be.
What time zone?
Right. Never text me, Cody, ever. No, I'm kidding.
So we are very appreciative to have you and a chunk of your time here. You know what? I had this toward the bottom, but since we've got it, you must be used to this life, man. I was doing some research and I didn't realize you triple majored in Syracuse, broadcast journalism, economics, and psychology. How did you make that work?
So I was one of those fortunate kids who came in with AP credits. So I had some psych and econ experience from high school. My high school made us take economics. It was a requirement to take econ. I don't know if everybody's was like that or whatever, but we had to take econ. So they had AP available. And it's funny, my AP econ teacher in the Chicago suburbs, Mr. Chasey, now is a Michigan resident. He has a lake house on Omena Lake, 2 hours away. And there was an off day this season where I went to reunite with him, my econ teacher from high school. And we've gotten back in touch in part because of the Tigers. So in part, I just enjoyed it. My mind kind of organizes econ and human behavior in that way. But it also was because I had a requirement to take it. And the teacher is still a friend of mine. There you go.
That's awesome. I took AP Econ, but I mostly remember making fantasy football trades in that class. So even though it was AP,
So what we did, it was the last class of the day. It was seventh period or whatever. And during March, I and a couple other friends would try to convince Mr. Chasey to turn on the NCAA tournament in class instead of doing classwork, which we successfully did a couple times. So you and I had similar experiences.
All right, now we're talking.
Yeah, that was the last semester of my senior year, so I wasn't doing anything AP. I was taking it reg. So kids today, they don't know about trying to convince the teacher to put the game on. Now you just have it on your phone anyway.
Right.
So
yeah, how old are we, Cody? Well, you didn't say it, I said it, but I'm old now.
Wait,
31.
What? I'm 30, so yeah.
Yeah, you're not old. You're not old. You watched it on your phone. I'm the old one. That's fine.
That thing just missed me. I was still rocking the sliding phone back in high school. The razors were all the rage.
You had a razor?
I didn't have one. I wasn't cool enough. I wasn't cool like Jason to have a razor, but I just had one of those AT&T special phones that slide. I thought that was the coolest thing. It wasn't the Sidekick, but it was the knockoff version of it. So you slide up and you start texting. But the screens weren't working there great.
Full keyboard or what?
Full keyboard.
Yes, that's sick. Let's go.
Bring them back. Life is simpler then.
Now that we have really relived the glory days, let's talk about the Detroit Tigers a little bit. And what was it? Ended up being an awesome season. Jason, this was your first season with the Tigers, obviously. Now that the dust has settled a little bit, when you just reflect back on this year, what are kind of the things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, it's wild to think about because just like anything that goes eventually surprisingly well at a point, you almost in your mind organize it in the thing you remember most, which is the run that they made at the end of the season to get to the postseason, and you just kind of see it as an eventuality of the year. But that wasn't the case. I mean, we're all in it and we're all watching the games and existing in the biosphere of baseball. And I can't tell you that as of June and that trip to Atlanta and Houston, that I thought that was a playoff team or gonna be a playoff team. And then the deadline hits and all of that. But the headline to me is just the amount of moments the team had. You know, it wasn't just winning games, it was moments to win games. I mean, the Parker Meadows Grand Slam in San Diego is so improbable, but the most improbable single moment has got to be Javi Baez's homer off of Andres Munoz, which might have ended Scott Servais' tenure as manager of the Mariners. We don't know, but like that started the Tigers 5-1 against the Mariners didn't help with that. And so there are all these moments that are littered. Even that Dodgers series before the All-Star break with the bunt shenanigans, 2 straight days, or 2 straight plays, but the 2 straight days of the comeback. Those, you say in retrospect, like, oh, maybe that was the time where we all thought something. None of us went to the All-Star break and said the Tigers are going to be a playoff team because of those 2 games. So it's just littered with moments that I actually almost prefer to keep noisy rather than trying to organize them into something, because I don't think there's a great organization to it. I think it's a lot of moments that led to energy and led to decision making. I think you have to include as well, if you're going to really rewrite this story and sort of re-examine, that they lost Scooble starts against Oakland and Colorado while making an epic run to the playoffs. That's ridiculous. Like, you to 0.2% is whatever it is, but to say that they lost 2 Scooble starts to 2 of the worst teams in baseball and made the playoffs after that for a team that I think some people might outside nationally think, oh, they're kind of one note. It's Scooble and the Pips, right? Like Tarek Scooble got them to the finish line. That's not actually true in September, when they needed to bank wins, as people say in this industry now. They lost 2 of his starts. He helped, but they lost 2 of his starts. So I tend to think of it as like a little bit of a scatter plot of just random fun that happened to all of us over the course of a month and a half.
Yeah, I'll be curious what, because we haven't talked about this yet, Cody. I'd be curious what kind of moment sticks out with you. The Parker Meadows stuff, and include the catch in there, definitely is tops my mind. I kind of go back to the Williamsport game because, like, that's, if you're in the playoffs, you're on the national stage, right? To this point, the team hadn't been much on the national stage, and then you have McKinstry scoring from second, Jace Young having his moment, kind of the, it's the Yankees. You know what I mean? And Scooble did start that day. So, like, it was all this kind of stuff kind of, I don't know if it, like, was a coming out party per se. Because, again, at the time, we weren't thinking that grand. But if you look back and you group it together, to me, it does kind of play out that way. And I'll always remember it because, speaking to a Chicagoan here, like, I was in Chicago that weekend for a bachelor party. And I was dog tired, and that game went into extras, and then we had to do a podcast, and I don't know what color my face was the next day, but it certainly wasn't anything resembling a summer tan. I can tell you that much. But Cody, is there, as we look back here, we're talking about moments. Is there anything that kind of is A1 for you?
It's hard to have an A1. I mean, I think either the Meadows catch or the Grand Slam is that. But yeah, we could spend a whole podcast just talking about the cool moments down the stretch. The road trip in Kansas City and Baltimore, I think, is when people finally started to be like, wait, this might be real. So you have Kansas City. I mean, just Winsel Perez coming up big. Jace Young's karate kick slide under Salvador Perez's glove, and then of course the Trey Sweeney catch in Baltimore. Like, we could go on and on. There were so many things that had to happen and had to go right. Which kind of leads me to my question. Like, that ended up being, I think, the most famous Jason Benetti call of the year. A city that doesn't care about the odds has a baseball team to match. That was the one that ended up on T-shirts. So was that spur of the moment for you, Jason? How did that one come about?
Yeah. So, when I first was hired, I had to make a choice in my life in making this happen as well, in being a Michigander and going to Detroit. And they had to make a choice on me. And I didn't want to do something that was truly inauthentic to myself. And so in the couple days prior to the announcement, I was just like, in reading up about Detroit as this was all happening and understanding, or trying to, right? As somebody who's a transplant, you can't fully understand, but you can try to. And I felt like where Detroit overlaps with my sensibility and the things I understand most is, like, we were joking around about the NCAA tournament during class, but I grew up rooting for Hampton against Iowa State. Like, I grew up with horrendous brackets because I always picked like Southeast Missouri State against somebody really actually good. And so I always rooted for that. And I do think I see the world of sports through a lens of, well, why can't they win? But then you become a sports announcer and you work for national networks, and it's not sexy to do the Big South championship game, right? And it's you see in ratings and network selections what drives those moments. And I feel badly for anybody who in this life gets overlooked. And I tend to think that Detroit as a city, in the people I've spoken to and what I've read, has gotten a reputation for being something that is not fair at all times, or even close to at all times. And so, that call was in no way about me and my existence as somebody with a disability. But the reason I can feel Detroit, I think, is because I exist as a person who people have thought something about that has been incorrect at points. And so the depth of feeling that comes with that makes sense to me. And this team that even I had said, yeah, the playoffs are probably not going to happen, in my head, right? I root for underdogs by rule. And I thought this team was not a postseason team. Their actions at the deadline suggested that. And so I see the world through that prism in some ways. And that kind of just hit me as that moment was happening. It was a game too, where it happened again. Those like day games where the Tigers go down early at home against a team that has a worse record or likely worse fortunes, those were not rare over the course of the beginning. Like, the Oakland series to start the year is the perfect example of probably could have done better with the day game at the tail end of that thing, right? And so that was another sleepwalk potential day against Tampa Bay. And as I was seeing the season kind of unfold and just watching that game, it was like, man, they won't stop. And then that just kind of came out. That's a long way of saying it, but that's where it comes from in my heart.
Well, I'm curious, as someone who's a career broadcaster and obviously, looks at it as a science, and you probably have your entire life. Baseball, probably more so than any other sport, has like team connection to their broadcaster is very strong, radio and TV. And if you just go to the Wikipedia page of both radio and TV announcers, not all play-by-plays, but we'll group them all together, it's a long list of legendary names. Like, even some that I didn't know. Like, did you know Mel Ott used to do some Tigers games? I didn't know that. But but like, do you feel like your job is part of like, is there a legacy element to your job? Because having a famous line like that, whether you intend to or not, is going to be like, it's going to be a legacy defining moment for Jason Benetti calling Tigers games. And so like, is that something you're conscious of, like the legacy element of calling games 162 or however many you end up doing with your schedule, and being in people's living rooms and in their cars and all that stuff? Is that conscionable to you?
Yeah, it's not. You might like roll your eyes when I say this, but I promise you that's not the point. It ends up being part of the job, though. Like, I understand the legacy of Ernie Harwell and George Kell and everybody who's done it before me. Like, I never got into this to ingrain myself in a community. Like, I became a play-by-play announcer because I love play-by-play. It was very odd for me this offseason to have like one city be like, we got your guy, and the other city being like, what are you can take him, or like, sorry, we lost, whatever version of that you read on the social media. But the point for me has always been like, let's make certain that this thing, which is kind of the remaining thing that all of us do together, and it's a little grandiose. I could understand that people would be like, well, we need to have other things that we all do together. That's fine. But if there is one thing that is probably on the top of the medal stand of our country that we all do together, it's sports. Like, nobody asks what your affiliation is when you're sitting at a ballpark. Like, you just high five people and you just like drink with people and all of that stuff. And so to me, it's about making sure that everybody knows why this moment can matter, because we have seen sports like revitalize cities, whether we like that or not, whether we think that's the right decision for all of this and all of us, that's for individuals to decide. But it's the thing we all do together. And so there's a gravity to it that I never expected when I wanted to become a this. Right? Like, I wanted to be an announcer for a team because I thought it was fun to follow a team. But once you start to say it's part of the fabric of the city, that's where it feels not daunting, but heavy and important to me. And I kind of personally wish that we had more things that were heavy and important to all of us. I think we'd probably be better off just overall, all of us, with more of those. But if I'm going to be in a chair and I'm going to make somebody, we as a crew are going to make somebody feel something about this, like, we better do it right. We better understand that, like, there are a lot of people who wake up and feel better because the Tigers won. And I promise you guys, I did not have a concept of that totally until the pandemic happened in 2020. And I just started, like, I did a video on Twitter at the time that was like just a video, like, talking about connections with people. And then it turned into people nightly sending me messages to read to their loved ones because they weren't together. And the depth of things people shared with me in those, like, my father recently passed away, or like, I haven't been able to say this to my mom, or whatever it might be. And I'm just like the White Sox sports announcer. But the fact that people spend enough time with us to be willing to share that means that I have to take it with that level of understanding and empathy.
I remember those were awesome. I remember at the time thinking how great those were.
Thank you. I mean, it was as important for me as just to feel like I was connected to anybody. We were all alone, I think, but it taught me that we're on TV for so many hours. Like, you're stuck with us for so long. That's a lot of us. But you do really get to know the people doing this and the crew and like the players. It's a lot of time spent, and you might as well do it in a way that is connective instead of disconnective.
Yeah, I think those are some incredible points you make, and it kind of leads into something I wanted to bring up, and I hope I get this in a way that comes across, correct, because I'm also a transplant. I've lived in Detroit for 5-6 years. Kieran lives in Dallas, but his dad, grew up in the area, was Al Kaline's paper boy. He understands the history. I've come to really love this city. Like, I think it's a cool place. There's a ton going on. There's a lot to do. There's new stuff popping up all the time. Like, I don't want to neglect the city's history or its past or the many problems it can still face. But like, we're also to a point where, yes, the odds are there and they've been overcome. Like, I wish there were almost more positive self-talk around Detroit now. Like, does that make any sense? Like, do you have any thoughts on that notion?
Yeah, anything I would say would be in some ways anecdotal, and I think you and I feel the same way, that at some point, like, it's going to turn nationally as well. I think that's part of it too, is like that everybody I talk to about Detroit, I explain to them, like, just come to the city. Just come to the city, spend 2 days, come to a game. You don't even, like, come to any game, right? Just experience that. I felt it, like, through the TV with the Lions last year before I even came to the city. There is a depth of humanity in that city. I'm not through the book, but I'm reading Once in a Great City. Have you ever read it?
Yes, great book.
Phenomenal. And the understanding of Motown and the level of drive from somebody like Barry Gordy to get that done. Like, I feel like that pervades this city no matter what generation it is. Like, there's a feeling like, yeah, we'll innovate, just give us a chance. And I want that big moment for the city, whenever it comes. I really do feel that. So I get where you're coming from. I would, anything about self-talk, I think, would be anecdotal, but I get it. I get where you're coming from. And I also think civic pride that comes with a rising tide of sports teams can, again, whether we like it or not, can really help that.
Something I was curious about, and I think in a way it kind of ties in a lot of what we're talking about right now, is that not only did you come to a new city, a new market, a new team, you had a lot of teammates. Like, the part of the broadcast expansion, I guess you would call it, is that there were going to be a lot of guys in the booth next to you. So, the Petries, the Gibsons, Pena was a new addition, Dirks, eventually later in the year. I'm kind of curious, like, the challenge, like, how do you kind of get that kind of chemistry with so many new people in what in a lot of ways is a pretty short amount of time?
Yeah, I was really, it's a good question. And I think it's one that's important to our industry, especially with analysts getting more and more like the Tom Brady deals of the world. It's in part on, everybody. And Kevin Burkhardt does an amazing job of, like, getting through, seeing the play through Tom and really using him to his strengths. And I think it's an important part of the job. And it's funny. I sent Dave Pash, the Cardinals announcer, ESPN, NBA, all college football. Can you tell I'm like a play-by-play announcer dork? It's just like random esoteric references. But Dave is phenomenal. And I sent him a tape when I was in college, and he was like, "You are doing a great job, but it sounds like you're in a booth separate from your partner. You'd never respond to your partner." And that started me down the path of, like, understanding that it's got to be in us. And so the Peacock games I did 2 years ago, it's a long way of getting into the answer, but like the Peacock games I did 2 years ago, when I had a different 2 partners every week, it was the local person from each team, and we just made a booth, right? Nobody cares if we knew each other. Nobody cares if we liked each other. Nobody cares any of that. Just put the show on, right? Like, you have to get the best from them and create an us right now. It's like speed dating. And that taught me, like, nobody cares about any of this. You better figure it out within 30 seconds And there were times where we'd finish the first inning. I'd be like, you were way funnier off the air and you were way more insightful off the air. Will you guys do what you just did when we had lunch, please? But then you figure it out, right? And there were times, I'm sure, where they're like, who is this clown doing the game with us? But you have to figure it out right away. It's just like, go, do it. And so I think it's really important to just try hard. And I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but like try hard to figure out what the best traits and what the wheelhouse is of each analyst and figure out where you really connect. But it's why listening to each other, as Dave told me when I was like 20, really matters, because if we hear each other, everything else flows from that. And I think we have a group of analysts who are really good conversationalists in general. Like they're willing to sit and talk on a human level instead of just, I do my piece, you do your piece, and that's it.
Yeah, I think the average viewer has no idea how much goes into every single broadcast. But if we can be real for a second, like you took over a booth that had ranked last in fan polls for a couple of years. I have a feeling next time there's a poll that comes out, the Tigers are no longer going to be last. So what are you proud of in terms of the broadcast this year? And like, if you were a team, what would you say your like off-season needs are? Like, what are the focuses for you, next year?
Yeah, it's a really, that's a funny way to put it. I like it. I'm most proud of that it became an us. Like, and not even just including me. Like, I think Petrie and Dickerson, if you go watch back the 13-inning game in Oakland, I was watching it in a hotel room in Salt Lake City, but they're an us. They talk to each other. There's an us. Dan and Andy have a great relationship from radio. And so I think there was predominantly an us with whoever you put in the booth. And I do think creatively we're pushing. We're willing to try new things. Sometimes it's overly zany. Sometimes it's a little much, but like that's the creative process. I don't think anybody was under any impression that we were just going to play it straight for 9 innings over and over again. I can't do that. I would start to really lose my mind. But what I'm proudest of in that vein is if that was a criticism in June or July, and then you turned on the games in September, we did the games. And I think we covered the games with the gravity that was required. And that is super important to me, that our range is whatever the game presents us as a group. So like, let's not force something zany in when there's a moment of deep import to the city and the people watching it. We did the game. I think we nailed the moments as a crew, in part because we had figured out, like, in April we did Ray Tank Trivia Tuesday. Anybody remember Ray Tank Trivia Tuesday?
That's way over my head.
So I pitched to Johnny Kane the Tuesday in Tampa that we do Ray Tank Trivia Tuesday. So like
I remember now. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna be honest. For a second, I thought like Ray Tank was like a guy.
Oh no!
It was Ray Tank. No, I remember Johnny out by the Ray's tank.
Yeah,
I got you.
Yeah. So Johnny goes to the Ray tank. I had said to him like, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And he thought it was kind of funny. So it was a kind of close-ish game, and it was like the 6th inning, and our crew was like, "Let's do it." In part because I think they were trying to like satisfy my need for creativity and show that they are allies. So like, I'm not going to say, well, not now, guys, because then they'll be like, well, you idiot, you told us you want to do more creative stuff. So we're kind of in a pinch as a group because we've not experienced this together in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not going to call them off for the previously stated reasons, and they're going to jam through it. It was a disaster because it started, Johnny, we still joke about it. Johnny had a group of kids around him, and I thought he was going to ask the kids the questions about the Ray tank. So like, what type of Ray is this, right? Instead, they were just his friends' kids that were just like there to hang out for the segment. But he was asking me the questions. So he asked the question. There's like a 1-second delay because of the tech anyway, because he's all the way out there and he's using a different, like this thing called Live View. And so he asked the question. I'm sitting there waiting for like Jillian and Francis and all the other kids to answer. Nobody's answering anything. We're just sitting there. Nobody's doing anything. And finally, like, I get it that I'm supposed to answer. It's totally ridiculous. And like we had a conference call the next day, and I was like, look, we all screwed up together, and that can only work out for the best because now we get to call each other off when the timing's wrong. But those are the things we did early that I think led to us being able to really zone in and not, I don't want anybody as a crew member to do anything to satisfy my creativity. And I don't do that for anybody else in the truck either. I want it to be a group thing that we're all like, yes, now as a group. But, you know, when somebody new's there, you're feeling each other out. It was a travesty. It really was. And there are people that still like will say to Johnny on the concourse when he's at the set, they'll be like, is it a Ray Tank Trivia Tuesday?
Well, you know, one of the things I try to remind myself and Cody when we do this is like, you know, there's no such thing as batting 1,000, like, you know, doing a podcast, doing a broadcast, you know, playing a game or whatever. It's okay to try things, and not every idea is going to work. You know, so I admire the need to try to be creative, because I think we try to do that here too. And especially, you know, during the off season, there's not, you know, for a while, there's not going to be anything going on. I did have a more Tiger specific question specific to you, because we talked about your broadcasting prowess and, you know, all these games you do. You've talked to, I'm sure, close to 1,000 head coaches / managers in your career. And so you've seen all kind, you know, of different levels, and you've seen some of the best. You've seen some of the ones that didn't work out. I'm kind of curious, AJ Hinch, a guy that you're around on a near daily basis, like, what traits does he possess that you can identify, because you have so much experience, you know, talking to, interacting with some of the best, like I said, head coaches / managers in sports? Like, what is it about AJ Hinch that makes him successful from your perspective?
I think it's two things, and one leads to the next. If I'm really trying to be as granular as possible to pick out the specific thing that he, like, number one, it's his perceptive ability. He sees everything. He sees body movements. I assume he's a great poker player because he's just on everybody's physical movements. Like, somebody slumps their shoulders, I'm sure he sees it. I believe that. And so he gets the benefit of the doubt for seeing things basically at all times. And then I would say what that leads to is he knows what to give everybody when they need it. I think there's a lot of like, oh, this guy today needs that. Like, I go up to him and I say this thing, and it makes him feel part of it. And I think when I say that, it sounds a little intentional to the point of not having human feeling. And I don't mean that, because I do think he's a really caring guy. Like, I do think he understands that there were memories made because of this team. And I think that matters to him. But I also think because he sees everything, he is so he's so locked in on each person's day and what they're feeling, each player, each staff member. He's very inclusive when it comes to making sure that he recognizes that he just walked by somebody even. Like, there's an understanding that that person has value to the team and they should be treated as such. And my college football partner, Brock Heward, is one of these people in a production meeting. He has a quarterback sensibility. He was one. He'll go through his stuff, but then he'll see that our associate director just kind of like took a drink that spilled a little bit, and he'll like call that out, and he'll bring in people. And I just see on a weekly basis in college football the value of that. And I think they're very similar in that way. Cody, I wonder if you would feel the same, like if you would say that that's like number one. But I think that's the trait that is unique to AJ that you don't see in leaders as often. There are other traits, but that's the one that I would say is unique at the head of the class.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree in that that's something that stands out. Look, I spend way too much of my life trying to get inside AJ Hinch's head, both baseball and otherwise, and he knows it. And that can be a daunting task. He's obviously a very smart guy, and yeah, his emotional intelligence is off the charts. And sometimes when I have an interaction with him like that, I come away thinking, okay, well, why did he do that? Why did he say that? Because he just seems to. I'm not on his team, it shouldn't matter, but he seems to just be very deeply plugged in to every little emotional detail, like very much like you said. Yeah.
It's like the human condition, and I would bet he wasn't like that in Arizona. I would bet he's learned that. Sometimes you can tell, not that he was unfeeling or uncaring or whatever, but I bet based on how much he values it now, or at least I think he does by watching, I would bet he's realized that there is something a little magic and edge of the bell curve-ish in that.
Yeah, oddly enough, last episode mentioned something his good friend Brody Van Wagenen once told me, and this brings to mind another Brody quote, which was he spent a long time using his psychology degree on himself. And I
That's
think that's what he did in his earlier days, and just through experience is now actually using it, to relate better to other people.
that's I think that's probably it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna shift gears. No smooth transition here, but I think on the flip side of everything we've talked about tonight is the reality that you left the Chicago White Sox, which in a way makes you look like a clairvoyant genius. But given the people you know there and the relationships you forged, what was it like to watch the White Sox more from afar as their season obviously spiraled into a record for most losses in a year?
Yeah, it's I don't know that you're going to believe me when I say this, but I really got closure between November when I got hired with the Tigers and the beginning of the baseball season. And then I got bonus closure with the first series of this season in Chicago. But I really felt like I got very lucky that this job with these people came open when it did, because it left me not searching for something, but able to have found and then feel like somebody found me as well. There was a lot of mutual benefit in me going to the Tigers, and I think that's the best way to do a move like that. But it was hard for me to see people that I care about living in that existence, because if you've left a place and you don't still have friends there, you've done it wrong. So like I to detach from the place is not to detach from the people necessarily. And so it was hard on them, I know, but it's also like it's it's a season. But the one thing baseball does when you're in it is it feels like everything is crashing down when it's bad. Like life is just bad. And so I don't like seeing that for other people, but for me to be away from it and watch it, like I didn't watch a lot of White Sox baseball, I promise you. The games I did were the games I did, and like just catching up before a series. But I wasn't like going home and checking on it because I was out of that environment and I was out of that place. And if I'm true to my word of like live with what's in front of you, I I I I had a city and a team and a staff and a bunch of players to learn. If I'm spending any time other than just random acts of I wonder what this looks like as one of the 30 teams, I'm doing it wrong, honestly. But yeah, it was very difficult even after I made the decision to have like phone calls with our crew, people I left that are like super creative forces that were really powerful collaborators that I didn't love leaving behind.
Well, it's funny you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that you when you look back at the season, you just kind of combine moments and it all kind of makes sense. But at the time, you would never have thought like this season would end the way that it did. I would say the first like moment of this franchise kind of elevating itself was your hire. I mean, I said this on a pod earlier this week. It's just like I associate a higher level with that move, and then it just makes sense in the story to hire Jason Benetti, and then you have this miraculous run to the playoffs, which includes a signature line as we discussed. So obviously those things are not directly related, but in my mind, and I'm sure in the minds of fans, like it groups together and it makes sense, So I'm just saying,
it made Jason blush. Just wait.
I appreciate it's my overhead lighting. I appreciate it very much, Kieran. Like I sincerely do. And I will also say it is very weird for me to hear that, because I never, like I said, I just never got into this for anything other than me loving like words and the craft and all of that. It was something that I was good at a young age, or somebody told me I was, and it made me feel valuable and whole. Like that's it. I enjoyed doing it. And then suddenly to like be the harbinger of a dawning era seems a little grand for me. I get it. And I cannot appreciate you saying it more, in that I've worked very hard at this and I want it to be a good experience for the audience. And I'm proud of what I've, and the people I've been around, all of that. Like I'm proud of that, but it's very odd to be like a bellwether county.
Things just work out that way, I mean, it was perfect.
Well, all right. As we wrap up here, man, this has been some terrific conversation, as I knew it would be. Tiger territory would not be complete without a little bit of baseball talk. So, Jason, after this team made its run to the playoffs, what do you think now constitutes a successful offseason for the Detroit Tigers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's building on the winning we saw at the end of the year. It's, now after it all happened, you then have to ask the question, how sustainable is that? And the answer to surging to the finish line is, I have no idea what sustainability is. I actually, just thinking about it broadly, and I'm thankful that it's not my job, I think you can argue that the run at the end of the season kind of clouds the picture more. You celebrate the wins at the end of the year as a team, and you celebrate the improvement, but like how much of it is the mom lifting the bus off of the kid that you hear about in like the allegory, and I don't think it's that. There is a ton of individual improvement on this team. So I don't think it's a lot of that, but I do think it clouds the picture just as a general thought on what that end of the season does. But you can list off Parker Meadows, terrifying level of improvement at the plate compared to his first stint. Trey Sweeney proved to be a piece, I think. Jace Young, we didn't see a ton of at the end of the year, but he got some time. Jackson Jobe gets up to the big leagues. I can list all the guys. Wencel Perez, I think, kind of gets lost in the shuffle for what he did early in the year because he was hurt for a part of the surge and all of that. So I think this team will be, in its decision making, will be not emotional. I don't think Scott's going to be like, he had a great 2 weeks.
Right.
Let's think he's this. And I think that'll be a little hard for fans when it happens. Eventually, whoever that is, whatever position change there, because it's not going to be the same 26 guys. So it never is. There's going to be difference. I do think, though, my hope is that it's build on this, right? That we can see signs of building on it, whatever that looks like. But it's not going to be the same 26 guys. So my feeling is I think the picture gets a little cloudy for either the fans or the front office or both. But I also think this chance in the postseason is going to help the core guys a lot, not even in the generic sense, But I just think that, hey, we've been there before helps. I really do in an emotionally driven sport. So I don't know, like, specific positionally what a better off season looks like at this point, but like my feeling is I hope there's building, and I don't think this team will do anything other than that.
Yeah, I mean, we Cody and I have talked about this. Is that, like, there's gonna be staying true to like this culture that you've tried to build, and then there's also like different levels of roster improvement that, like, it would be a disappointment for the fans, and maybe like the media would question it or whatever if, like, you're acquiring the same level of talent after a run like this, but at the same time you don't want to get over your skis, like, from an organizational building perspective. So Scott's going to have to balance that, opportunities for young players, but also the need to get, like, established, talent into the system. So it'll be fascinating to see.
I also think they have built some trust with fans, some, not all, but some, in the Michael Lorenzen, Jack Flaherty mold. In, we can help create pitchers here. So I think, like, there is some benefit of the doubt in grabbing a pitcher that people might not say, like, oh, that is the dude, and have something good come of it. And I do think with their success in that lane, I would expect that happens again, whether it's like this year or next year. That's a lane that's been successful enough, and I know free agents well enough to know that if there's somewhere that can fix you and they believe it, they're gonna try to get there if they want to and can make it work. So I would imagine that pattern would continue in the future, whether the opportunity is there this year. Now I sound like a real GM, right? Like, if the opportunity arises. But I do think that pattern has been real and important to this team. So I would bet on that.
Yeah, that makes me think of a conversation I had around the trade deadline. There's a Tigers official who kind of asked me, like, how do we get out of this reactionary cycle? Basically, how do we stop getting killed every trade deadline or every move we make? And I didn't really know what to say, because part of it was like, well, you don't, because this is 2024, and whatever you do, social media or talk radio or Tiger territory is going to crush you for it. But the one thing I could offer is, like, one thing is to win a couple of these deals, and then you start getting the benefit of the doubt. And like you said, the Tigers have done that with their free agent pitchers, to the point that when we're on this show saying, hey, maybe the Tigers have identified X guy as a project, it's kind of hard to question it. Like, they've earned the benefit of the doubt. And
I think so.
We'll see what happens with that Dodgers trade. But right now, looks like they've earned some goodwill that may carry over to the next trade deadline.
I think so. And I hope so, because I really do think when teams add value, they should get credit for it. I've seen enough, like, this is not a White Sox comment. Please don't think this is a White Sox comment, but, like, traveling the league, there are people who try really hard to convince that they have developed somebody, and it's kind of the same swing, or kind of like when the player is choosing it for the specific express purpose of value getting added to them, I think that's when you say that's actual marginal benefit. Like, that's actual change in the marketplace. So I don't know. I agree with you a little bit though, Cody. Like, it's always whatever happens this year will define. But I do think this year really should earn Scott and the group goodwill. I also am going to be like AJ for a second here. I'm like I heard myself say it when I said I would bet on that. AJ would then say, "We don't bet." I would guess that's a possibility.
The AJ-isms rub off on all.
That's when you know you've been around somebody for too long. You hear
Right.
it, you're like, "Oh, well, he would say this."
All right. Well, thank you very much for the time, Jason. This was an absolute pleasure. Is there anything else in your mind? Anything else you would like to add?
I'm good. I appreciate your coverage, Cody. Like, you dive deeper than the average person, not on our beat. That's nothing against any other beat writer, but like, and please, nobody in the audience be like, oh, he's sucking up to Cody. Like, I like saying good work when I see good work. And, you know, like I try to cite you when I read your stories and we're on the, like, it's important to me. So like good stuff, if that's okay to say
Jason.
without being too much of like, I don't mean to be a sycophant.
No, you're good. Hopefully I didn't blush this time.
Okay. We're both rather translucent, so it's hard to
Not wrong.
All right. Well, once again, want to thank Jason for taking the time. Want to thank Cody for taking the time. Want to thank everybody for listening. This is Tiger Territory on the Foul Territory Network. You can follow us on all the socials. Search Tiger Territory, as well as YouTube, where you can see Jason Benetti blush. If you're listening to this, go to our YouTube page and see him blush. And see the man who gave you such a great soundtrack for the summer. So for Jason Benetti, Cody Stavenhagen, I'm Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a great week.